So once you have started getting all the information from your site, say you've met with the client, you've visited the site, you've done your research, you then want to start thinking about how you're going to approach the design of the site and how you're going to start locating features on that particular site. So generally the order of priority is said to be water, access, and then housing sites. So water is given first priority because you really want to think about how you're going to make use of the topography of the landscape to best effect to capture or to drain the water, or both normally, to give that farm production more access to water and help control the movement of water through that landscape. So you want to minimize the destructive impact of water flowing through your landscape too quickly, and you want to be able to also improve the drainage of some sites so that it's not going to hurt fruit tree production in those sites in winter. But you also want to think about how you're going to store the water in summer so that it's drought-proofed, that property, and make best use of the infiltration of that water into the ground so that the springs are recharged and the water spends longer moving through and spreading through that soil. So it's recharging the water in that system so that it's going to be more resistant to droughts and is going to improve its production over drought periods. But also thinking about the water flow and the management of the overflow so that it's protected against flooding. So that as the water comes up to a certain level, it's recharged all the groundwater and that site's holding up as much water as it can, that you manage the overflow of that water through that site to the best advantage. And sometimes just making use of the best storage and holding of the water is the best way to manage the flooding of a site, because the site can actually hold quite a lot of water if you just slow it down, spread it into the soil, and protect that site with good plant cover, which will help infiltrate the water into the soil. It's surprising how much water a site can hold before there's a discharge and an oversupply of water that will need to be managed. But once you do get to that point, you'll need to know where the overflow is and how can that be directed through the site and off the site so that it hasn't got a destructive potential on that site. So water often ties in with earthworks, and we go into that in more detail in the water section and earthworks section of the course, but just touching upon it now as an important factor when you're setting up the design of a property, that you have considered where or how you're going to manage the flow of water through that site. Access is another important one, so you want to be able to make use of the best locations for access. So often that's a ridge line. So if you've got a ridge running through your property where it slopes off on both sides of that, if you locate your access driveway along that ridge, the runoff of water will occur on both sides of it so that it protects that infrastructure so it's not going to erode very easily. And you may even tie up the access to water harvest. So if it's got a slight incline, so if this is a fairly level site but there's a slight incline on the access and it's teed up with a drain on the downside, it would help direct the water along that access into that drain, which can then be directed into ponds to help store that water. So access is either along ridge lines or on contour or slightly off contour. So again, the erosive impact of water going through the site is not going to erode the access structures so that their longevity is preserved, because it will cost obviously to do all the digging and grading to level off access areas, or to do water work, walls as far as digging out ponds and creating dams or creating swales or other infrastructure around managing access, water, sorry. So you want to make sure that the access and the water match the topography of the landscape. The other thing is location of the house site. So once you have an idea about the location of the site, where would it be best located as far as protecting it from winds, giving it the best access to the most productive zones, giving it good access to roading. So for example, here's the house site here. It's got good access to a main road that we can say kind of moves through here, and there's access to the property here, so it's kind of centrally located to give handy access to your production zones, but also with easy access to the road, and it's on a nice level area away from the steeper contours at another area of the site. So first priority, water, access and house sites, and just making sure that they match up to the particular characteristics of your site. And then once you've got them in place, it may be established on the site already, or you may have to go through that thought process if it's a completely blank site and map out where the water and access and house site will be. But once you've got those major things in place, then you want to start breaking it out into zones. So thinking about what is going to be the zone 1 area, which is your intensive fruit vegetable production around the house. So obviously that will be the area in closest proximity to the house. And then zone 2 is bigger areas. Zone 1's generally anywhere from 1/8 of an acre to an acre in size. And then zone 2, which is your orchard area, could be anywhere from 1 acre to 10 acres in size generally, could be a bit more, maybe 20. But it's going to be quite high intensity managed fruit production. So if it's not your commercial production, 10 acres is more than enough for your own production. But if it's on a commercial scale, it may be up to 20 or 30 acres on a commercial scale. But they are also going to be located in areas quite close to the house. So in this particular site, it's on a flatter location, quite high on the site, close to the house. So it's nice and level, giving good ability for mechanical harvest and access to the road to be distributed out, and access to the house for maintenance. And then coming down from the more intensive zones is the zone 3, which is the grazing orchard zone. So these are the areas, you've got to make sure there's some different areas so that you can move the livestock around, and the impact on a particular site is not going to be for any great length of time, so that a site can recover and the pasture plants can recover in production. And also that there's access to roads so that you can get livestock on and off a site easily, or for people to be able to come in and do any maintenance to the livestock. And then you've got your zone 4 production, so it could be timber, it could be nut production, it could be firewood production, but it's your managed forestry or large scale production crop. And zone 5 is the wildlife habitat, so trying to incorporate within the design of a site some areas to provide habitat for wildlife, so that they are incorporated into the design considerations. So generally speaking, this could be a 10-acre site or even a 20-acre site, where you would start thinking about the placement of zones. So generally speaking, where you'd start thinking about the placement of zones to then act as the basis for your concept sketches, which will then take all the information and research that you've earlier done and map it out into some different ideas that you can then approach the client and get some feedback and refinement to your designs, which will help inform what your final design looks like. So once you've mapped out your property into your different zones and you've produced your concept sketches, I like to produce 3 different concept sketches for each of the different zones in a production, so that there's lots of content there to talk with the client and get feedback and guide what the final design will look like. But when you get to the final design, you then got to start thinking about the presentation and the detail that's in that final design. So you want to make it look really nice. You want it to be the visualization of your service. So it's got to represent you well and be of high quality and also be very accurate, so that they can clearly see all the different features on your site. They can see where the contours are, where the access is, where different pathways through that site is, how water management is going to occur on that site. So where is it going to be stored? How is it going to be distributed? Any swaling or keyline design around infiltrating that water into the soil and helping work with the flow of water through that site. And also the details of production. So I like to have it right geared all the way down to the individual plant. So instead of just doing an area which is your orchard, actually going into the details of you've got your apple tree and you've got all your support species, and you've got maybe a nitrogen fixating tree, and then a pear tree, and all the various shrubs and ground cover species or vines that may be in that system. So really mapping it out in good detail so that a client can see the individual species that are included. And then when you get to the implementation of your design, it becomes easier to make a species list and to cost out that design, because you've factored where all the different species will be in your design. So also to show zones, so a good way to do this is often with layers. So you could have a layer which is just the topography of a site, so it's indicating where the areas of steepness are on a site. And then you may have another one which is just the access through the site, so showing the pathways and the roading access. And then you may have one where there's just all the existing structures, so there could be a house site, there could be a barn, there could be some established trees on the site. And then you've got another layer where it shows all of your new additions to the site, so where you're locating all of your orchard trees. And if you create them on different layers, you can then overlay them on top of each other, or you can peel back the layers to show the different elements to your design. I like to do this on AutoCAD software, so I use Lands Design, and that allows you to digitally create this, and you can zoom in on particular details, you can visualize it in 2D and 3D, and it works well with the drone photography, because you can make use of that to create detailed maps and overlay on top of those maps the details of your production. So that final plan is still just a working plan. It's providing a guide as to how you visualize the crystallization of the client requirements and all the site information with your design strategies, and bringing all that together to create a working plan which the client can use to create this or some close variation of this on their property. So the final stage of the design is the implementation strategy. So it's taking this masterful plan and providing the client with a step-by-step way to implement that, and a bit of a guide to avoiding the pitfalls or dangers of the implementation, and a bit of a strategy to navigate the costs and energy required to realize it. So you need to break it down into priorities. So your priority might, depending on what's already established at the site, but it may be establishing access to that house site, or the house site, or it could be doing the waterworks, or it could be establishing some of the shelter on that site to protect the crops or the animals that you're going to then bring into that site for your production. And then generally it's quite a good idea to follow your production from zone 1 out to zone 5. Some of the advantages of that is that the zone 1 production is quicker to give you a return. So if you need to feed yourself or get a return of income from a site, it's easier to do that from zone 1 than any of the other zones. So it's quite a good idea to set that up first and then work your way through the other zones as you set them up. It's good also to pace yourself, not do it all at once, so that you're spreading the costs and the time involved in the setup, but also giving yourself time to get the feedback from the site that will help refine and guide the other stages of your design, because you may change your mind on certain things, and you're just giving yourself time to be adaptable and responsive to the feedback from the site. And then you want to ideally provide a bit of structure to the client around the implementation of it. So I like to provide a 3-year implementation strategy, and over those 3 years, the different stages that I'd recommend, and the costing and the strategies involved in setting it all up. And also during that time, you can provide a service to set that up for the client, or you can come in and monitor the progression of the design and the succession of plants within the design. And it's giving you feedback as a designer as to how the production you visualized was actually realized in real life. And because this is a long-term game plan, coming back in 5 and in 10 years to see how things have developed and provide further support and guidance around changing the design and the strategies around the maintenance of the design.